Today we are talking about a series of action-adventure games that were often criticized for their lack of depth and challenge. But in this most recent entry, they reinvented a lot of the series' core systems to try and be the best that the series could be. I bet you didn't know the correlation between these two when you saw the title, but turns out they have a lot more in common than you might have thought. But what if I told you that LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga holds the key to solve everything that I had wrong with Kirby and the Forgotten Lands? Check a look. Hey everyone, I'm RVRocks, and I am in gamer heaven right now. I have gone on and on about this in other places on the channel before, but two very prominent experiences that shaped my infant gamer brain growing up were playing LEGO Star Wars and playing Kirby. And this past month, two headlining releases that the entire world seemed to be more than pumped for: LEGO Star Wars and Kirby. Both games that took a step outside their series' respective comfort zones and benefited immensely from it, in my opinion. Both of these games have been out for a little while now, and as you might expect, I've played the ever-loving shit out of both of them. But with that being said, there is a clear winner out of the two of them. I didn't dislike Kirby and the Forgotten Lands, but it definitely didn't live up to my personal hype for the game. While the transition to 3D aided the fatigue of always seeing Kirby in this 2.5D hellscape, it didn't benefit gameplay as much as I would have liked. But it's not all bad. The platforming, however mindless, was decently fun, and I think you'd be fucked trying to find someone who doesn't love the music, lore, and just general presentation of this game. However, the game only truly lost me in one area, and that is the combat. You see, half of the charm of any Kirby game is the abilities that Kirby gains when he eats an enemy. But in the Forgotten Lands, well, it's not good, or at least not that good. I don't like it. You see, in Kirby games past, a lot of the fun was trying out all of the different copy abilities. Not only were there usually a lot of different ones to see, but each one also had a decent amount of depth and different maneuvers you could pull off. Especially in the more recent entries, these movesets were starting to resemble something just short of a moveset you would see for a fighter in Super Smash Bros. However, this depth seems to have all but faded into star-shaped dust in Kirby and the Forgotten Lands. With the addition of the third dimension, there became a loss of directional inputs. And with a loss of directional inputs, Kirby's copy abilities went back to being simple. It would be disingenuous to say that each ability only has one attack now, but believe me when I tell you, it sure feels like each ability only has one attack now. This game seemingly forgoes copy variety in exchange for copy upgradability. But this system also feels flawed. Each ability has at least one way to upgrade it, but barring visual changes, only a few of them actually feel different in application. The fire ability gets upgraded to lava and then to dragon breath, but at the end of the day, it's still just an attack that spews a beam in front of you. And this lack of tactile progression feels especially rough when the game is just as, if not more enjoyable, playing as just Kirby with no abilities, sucking up and spitting out enemies. And compounding on that, so many times I would get bored or lose my copy ability, but every time you get a new copy ability, the game freezes to have Kirby face the camera and do a little dance because he ate a guy. It creates an experience where I want to view and explore this beautiful, fun world that they have created, but every couple of steps is a bunch of enemies that I don't have fun fighting, with a futile main gameplay gimmick, with constant pauses, and a frame rate that leaves a lot to be desired. Despite all of that though, I didn't hate the game. I know this sounds like a lot of bitching, but the highs are really high. 7 out of 10. But this brings me to LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, because it shares a lot of the same praises that I have with Kirby. The presentation is through the roof, the worlds have been expanded remarkably, with basically every named planet having a decently large open world to explore, the subscribe button is right beneath the video, and while the quality of the individual story levels presented can leave a lot to be desired, the pure, unadulterated fan service and love for every corner of this franchise is felt throughout every inch of this world. Especially for a series as hotly debated as Star Wars, it would have been really easy to dive in too heavily on sequel or prequel hate, but it treats everything with the same amount of respect, and in my opinion, that's super admirable. And the place that I think LEGO Star Wars surprised me most was in its combat, which is surprisingly enjoyable. Traveler's Tales LEGO games have always leaned into combat being a major factor in their games, but it always felt half-baked in one way or another. For every stride they made in making combat more enjoyable, myself and most fans would probably argue that they should have spent that dev time somewhere else. But in the Skywalker Saga, they completely reworked this system from past LEGO games to almost make it like a Devil May Cry light combo system, which is so fucking cool. Obviously, I could make a whole video on why this combat works so much better than the combat in other LEGO games, but that's not the point of this video. Here, I am comparing Kirby and the Forgotten Land's frankly uninteresting combat to that of LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. These games are both quote-unquote easy games. Games made for children to enjoy, games where death doesn't really act as a punishment. So if you ask me, that just begs the question, how do you make combat rewarding and enjoyable in a game where there is almost no difficulty? Because while both of these games are action platformers with elements of collectathons and puzzle games built in, both of them seem to really want to lean especially heavily into the action side of the action platformer. And you can really tell with how often they decide to throw enemies at you. So I've spent a lot of time detailing why I think Kirby's action doesn't work. So you might be thinking, if Kirby is such a slog, well then how does LEGO Star Wars, a game likely made even more for the kids than Kirby, fare any better? Well, to answer that question, I first need to tell you how action games create their enjoyment. See, for me, fun in an action game falls down to where they fall in the triangle of difficulty, spectacle, and experimentation. This may seem pretty self-explanatory, but it's actually a fair amount deeper than you might expect. Difficulty is how challenging a game is. Most games nowadays let you customize your difficulty, but even then, you can tell which ones the devs want you to play on the hardest mode. These types of games excel at giving the player tough workloads and patterns to learn, but that toughness often goes hand in hand with some of the greatest satisfaction in gaming when overcoming challenges. Some games that fall into this part of the triangle are your Souls games, the new God of Wars, and of course, Hyper Light Drifter. On the spectacle end are games that don't prioritize learning mechanics as much as just making everything look cool as hell. Typically, the draw of a spectacle brawler falls purely into how stylish everything is. They lean into a heavily glamorized atmosphere and know exactly when to sit back and just let the game do the talking. This end of the triangle contains stuff like Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, and the newer Kingdom Hearts games. And lastly, my personal favorite end of the triangle, action games that focus on experimentation are the games that may not be the most deep or polished experiences, but rather substitute those actions for having a wealth of content to explore and playstyles to dig into. While movesets may be shallow and content repetitive, the pure variety of the gameplay available at any given moment and the depth that comes with speccing out your character allows for you to always be trying something new and keeping your experience fresh. A few games that fall into this end are Monster Hunter, Diablo, and basically any of the Warriors games. A truly great game usually has some aspect of all three present, but at the end of the day, if a game exceeds at only one, chances it's gonna hold your time regardless. And that is exactly why LEGO Star Wars works for me when Kirby really doesn't. While Kirby sacrifices difficulty to provide, in my opinion, pretty mediocre combat variety and spectacle, LEGO Star Wars leans 100% into the side of experimentation to make its combat interesting. Kirby has a lot of abilities, sure, but it has nothing on the same tier of the breadth of different characters given to LEGO Star Wars, where every character, even if they reuse moves, feels distinct. When you have managed to make a character like R2-D2 as fun to play as in a combat setting as someone like Qui-Gon Jinn, you have made a pretty solid combat system. In most LEGO games, there is always a level where player 2 gets stuck with what I like to call the bum character. The Hulk and Black Widow, Robin and Alfred, Indiana Jones, and any number of characters who aren't Indiana Jones. If you're playing one of these games in co-op, which I would reckon most people who are playing a LEGO game are, there's usually at least one level where player 2 just gets completely left in the cold while player 1 plays a vastly more interesting character. But with the Skywalker Saga, wherein each character is fun to play in a combat setting and the difficulty is not the hardest, these moments where you're forced to play as a lame character aren't nearly as lame. Characters like R4, BB-8, or frankly any non-Jedis would be characters that I dread playing as in repeat playthroughs of the complete saga. But what would have been a source of annoyance in any other LEGO game shines through as a bright spot in the Skywalker saga. I have fun experimenting with these characters and trying to chain together the longest possible combos with just the most random guys, especially when there are so many different characters to play with different characters having different gimmicks for their combos. Force users can, well, use the Force, and characters with guns can work their guns into their melee combos or choose to tackle things from a more third-person shooter perspective, but no matter what, every attack feels true to the character it's attached to. I don't know if I have ever wanted to see how Bib Fortuna, Newt Gunray, or the lesbian reacting slug from Rise of Skywalker fought. But because of this addicting combat cycle, I suddenly have been given this thirst for knowledge of random Star Wars characters' combat abilities. Combine that drive with a skill tree that is just as, if not more effective than the upgrading system in Kirby, and an air launcher that makes comboing any enemy just the most fun, and you find me spending so much time on combat in a game that doesn't even have combat as a main priority. And that circles me back to the main point of this video. Neither of these games have combat as their main priority. Combat in Kirby and the Forgotten Lands is a motivator for exploration. They put a guy over in the distance as motivation for you to go check out that area. Combat in LEGO Star Wars is more or less filler between finding different Kyber bricks or puzzles. But just because combat is not a main priority of the gameplay, doesn't mean it's a small part of the game. LEGO Star Wars kept biting at my ankles with new opportunities well into the post-game, with a drive to unlock every character and explore every galaxy. Kirby didn't even get me close to finishing its post-game, which is a shame because I'd be willing to wager that I am one of the top 10 Kirby fans in the world. Both of these games use combat as filler, but only one shows their entire hand early on, and only one has kept me still playing. They couldn't be more different in terms of story, visuals, and presentation, but where they do align, one solved all my problems with the other. And if you think that my channel solves all your problems, then why don't you subscribe to RVRocks and ring the bell, like this video, and comment your thoughts on these two games. If it ain't clear, I like them both. This video isn't meant to portray Kirby as a bad game or anything. I just think LEGO Star Wars excelled particularly well at an area Kirby failed at, and I thought it could reach for an interesting discussion. Either way, let me know your thoughts either in the comments below or on Twitter at RVRocks. But before you do any of that, I have been RVRocks, and thank you so much for watching. See ya!